Detroit, 70% black, ringed by white suburbs that have been called the most segregated in the country.
Suppose one family moves in. What do you have? Prostitution, drugs, gang fights, gangs moving in. Who needs this?
It's a community aflame with racism, crime, and poverty, run by a mayor accused of throwing fuel on the fire.
Who the do you think you are to come in here and cross-examine me?
Brutal, naked aggression.
I have had it.
Hot rhetoric, backed up today by another increase in American troops. The cost of going to war with Saddam Hussein, whose life is on the line. Your daughters, your sons.
If George Bush orders American forces to attack Iraq, then God will have to forgive him, because I will not.
I was, very, very frightened.
It's a side of Murphy Brown you've never seen. Tonight, we'll show you the nuts and bolts of putting together a top-rated TV sitcom.
You saw them here 2 weeks ago. Members of Congress living it up on Barbados and then billing taxpayers for the tab. Tonight, the fallout from that report and other congressional trips in the works.
From 8AC News, with anchors Diane Sawyer in New York, Sam Donaldson in Washington, Chief Correspondent Chris Wallace, Judd Rose, Jay Shadler, and Sylvia Chase. This is Prime Time.
Hey, where's the elephant going?
It's okay. I'm sure he'll be back.
Dad, your hair!
This breathtaking moment was brought to you by the Canon E57 camcorder and its brilliant low-light capability.
If this is your idea of a well-rounded breakfast, you should try a wholesome Great Starts breakfast instead. Like whole wheat pancakes and light links, a new breakfast made with the goodness of grains. Great Starts, a real breakfast.
Remember that one? He's a natural. Great timing, Joe.
Hey, that one takes me back.
I love watching my highlights.
Yeah, but what's funny is you're known as a hitter and baseball's greatest all-around player. What I remember is your pitching for Mr. Coffee.
The best I've ever tasted.
Nice delivery, Joe.
You know, back then, Mr. Coffee was the best-selling coffee maker, and it still is today, because it still makes a delicious cup of coffee. Mr. Coffee, still the first choice of coffee lovers.
Prime Time from New York. Here now, Diane Sawyer.
Good evening. Our first story is not a story about a city. It's a story about some Americans who may be sending a kind of warning to the rest of us. A warning about what can happen when bitter polarization takes over the place where you live. In this community, the rich are divided from the poor, the races divided from each other, and it's all compounded by violence and drugs. We're talking about Detroit, once a symbol of U.S. competitive vitality, and some say still a symbol of the future, the first urban domino to fall. And standing at the center of it all, a controversial mayor facing charges that a lot of the blame lies at his feet. Here's Judd Rose.
This is a racist story, or so the mayor of Detroit would have you believe. It's about the city and the mayor, and it's no Valentine, which by his definition makes it a racist story.
To attack Coleman Young, I've become a code word for black. To attack Detroit is to attack black. Politicians run for office by attacking Detroit, by attacking Coleman Young. The media gets headlines.
You're a symbol.
By running bad... Exactly. You got it.
Coleman Young doesn't like criticism, especially from outsiders. But outsiders should take a close look at Detroit and wonder, could it happen here? The truth may hurt, but the truth is, Detroit is burning. Every city has arson fires, but only here is there one angry night like Devil's Night.
Every year on Halloween Eve, while other cities have trick-or-treating and window soaping, Detroit is engulfed in an orgy of arson. It's a holiday tradition, sort of like a mean-spirited Mardi Gras.
We were just sitting there watching TV, and all of a sudden there was a burst of flame, and that was it.
John Holden lived here for 31 years. It was gone in minutes. There were hundreds of fires like this during Devil's Night and the days before and after. Firefighters said there were nearly 400, but the city counted less than 300. Not surprising, Devil's Night is just more bad publicity for a city that already has plenty.
This is hell. It's hell here on Devil's Night.
Detroit is armed and dangerous. There are an estimated 1.2 million guns here, more guns than there are people.
This 22 automatic, I keep that one under my pillow with me.
Along with his 22, Art Sims owns a 9mm automatic pistol, an assault rifle, and a sawed-off shotgun. He lives in one of Detroit's better neighborhoods.
5 streets down, you got crack dealers, and you got people breaking in. They come down here, they see nice houses, they see nice things, and they want to break in. So, I got to protect myself from them.
You're prepared to use those?
Yeah, at all times.
Detroit is bleeding. If you're young, black, and male, you're more likely to die by violence than any other cause. Last year, there were 400 children aged 17 or younger who were shot in the city. 40 were shot dead.
Like a whole generation is being wiped out. It's like they just don't care about life. It's nothing to take a life.
Gloria G's son lost his life last April. Police sources think a drug hit team shot him by mistake. Quentin G was 19.
When I visit the cemetery, what can I do is just say to myself, why? Why is he there? He doesn't even know why he's there. He even asked the question, why did anybody want to shoot me?
Are you proud of Detroit?
Certainly I'm proud of Detroit. I wouldn't be here if I were not.
Coleman Young has been the mayor of Detroit for the past 17 years.
Is it a safe place to live, a good place to live, a good place to raise a family?
It's a good place to live, and I think it's as safe as any other. There's not a body on every corner, and the average citizen in this city is not confronted with the fear of his life. So don't bring me that crap about Detroit. We're no different. We have the same problems as any city in America.
Well, it's true. Most big cities do have the same problems as Detroit, and in some cases, they're worse. Washington has more murders, L.A. has more gangs, New York has more racial violence. America's cities are on a dark and dangerous road. But you come here, and you get the feeling that this is what the end of the road looks like. Here in Detroit, we have seen two worlds, one poor and black, one wealthy and white, two worlds with their backs turned to each other. Here in Detroit, we have seen the future, and it's frightening. We spent one night with the sheriff's narcotics squad raiding crack houses.
Down on the ground, now, hands out!
At one, a couple arrived so desperate for drugs, they ignored the police cars in front and came in anyway.
You always that stupid, or you just work at it hard?
At another house, the suspects included a mother of 3, pregnant with her 4th.
We've had families, literally arrested families, where the father, mother, sons, cousins, nephews, whatever, were all involved in the entire operation. I guess they pass on their traits, pass on their craft to the next generation.
You might be troubled by talk like that, especially coming from a cop. But Detroit's cops are overwhelmed by what has become a $1 billion-a-year business here. In fact, some black community leaders told us that the drug industry is now the biggest employer of young black men in Detroit.
Do you understand your rights?
Crack rules in a city where once cars were king.
Detroit put the world on wheels. In one generation, these and other names created America's #1 industry.
Then the bottom fell out. In the last decade, nearly a third of all auto workers lost their jobs, and blacks were hit hardest. Detroit's unemployment rate is staggering. Infant mortality is twice the national average, and almost 3 times as many Detroiters fall below the poverty line. The mayor will tell you that the reason Detroit's so bleak is because it's so black.
In this country, black people are victims of racism. It's not accidental. The cities around the nation, they have the largest percentage of blacks, have the largest percentage of poverty, have the largest percentage of crime, have the largest percentage of unemployment.
But in Detroit, blacks aren't just the majority, they're the authority. They run the police, the courts, the schools, and City Hall. But black political power hasn't meant black economic prosperity.
In my time in Detroit, I have driven and walked past mile after mile of decayed, rotting neighborhoods that look like war zones, of burned-out buildings, crack houses.
If you've been coming any length of time, those were there when I became mayor. And a whole lot of that's been restored.
There are also people that say that any white mayor who had developed the downtown area and let the neighborhoods collapse would have been kicked out of office a long time ago.
Well, that's bull. That's pure propaganda. Neighborhoods collapsed because half the goddamn population left.
In fact, Detroit, which at its peak in the 50s was home to 2 million and 80% white, today has less than 1 million, about 70% of them black. So now, when it's hammer time in the city, it's tea time in the suburbs. This is where whites went, taking their money and jobs with them. There are now more offices here than in Detroit, more stores too, so there's no reason to go to the city. The only thing the suburbs lack are blacks. One study called these among the most segregated suburbs in America. Suburbs created by white...
Police are searching for 2 men after a carjacking at an upscale New Jersey mall turned deadly Sunday night. Hoboken residents Dustin J. Friedland and his wife, Jamie Sheriff Friedland, had just finished a night of shopping at the posh mall at Short Hills in Millburn, New Jersey. The couple had just returned to their 2012 silver Range Rover in the adjoining garage. Dustin Friedland was getting into the vehicle when he was jumped by 2 men. Friedland apparently resisted the carjackers, who then shot him in the head. After forcing Jamie Friedland out of the car, the assailants fled in the Range Rover and another vehicle. Realizing the murder invited too much attention, they abandoned the vehicle in Newark. The back window had been smashed when the vehicle was discovered Monday morning. No motive for the attack has surfaced other than to steal the Friedland's Range Rover, which is considered a luxury vehicle. The mall at Short Hills parking garage is typically full of luxury vehicles, especially during the busy shopping season before Christmas.
Imagine that. What would Martin Luther King say today about a comedy routine that distinguished between good Negroes and bad Negroes in that way, or a lot of the black community doing the same thing, distinguishing between good and bad Negroes on that basis?
So you think is that a common problem? And you, I mean, are you upset at Chris Wright? You think I don't know if you're let me put it this way. You think he shouldn't have done that routine? You think it's not helpful to the process?
The politics of it. I don't mind the word, because I think the word can be explosive and powerful and useful in the right hands. Uncle Tom's Cabin and lots of literature and Huckleberry Finn, it can be a powerful word. But when he tries to say, let's morally distinguish between us and them, us being the good law-abiding Negroes, them being the bad criminals, and it just so happens that them bad criminals are mostly poor blacks, and we good Negroes are mostly middle-class blacks, because the crime rate between black and white middle-class folks are the same. Most of the crime is coming from blacks who are trapped in poverty. So when he's making those distinctions, he's actually, like Obama too often, wagging his fingers not just at black wrongdoers, but at poor black wrongdoers.
So that's really interesting, because oftentimes you'll hear on TV, well, look, and Bloomberg says this to justify stop and frisk. Most of the people doing the crime are minorities. So, and then of course the people who are inclined in the racist direction will say, "I knew it. You see, it was the black guys, right?"
Oh yeah. You know what? We have to get this conversation more sophisticated than it's been. When Jesse Jackson says, "Nothing more bothers me at this point in my life than walk down the streets hear footsteps, start thinking robbery, turn around, see someone white and feel relieved. When Reverend Jesse Jackson says that to an all-black congregation in Chicago, we know that racial profiling is not statistically irrational. It's not just crazy people who consider race when they're assessing someone's dangerousness. So we have to get at why it is that blacks disproportionately involve themselves in crime rather than denying those statistics and saying, let's just ignore race. Look, you take a group of people, you disproportionately concentrate them in desperate circumstances, don't be surprised that they disproportionately turn to desperate undertakings like crime. If you have a difference in the crime rate from these poor oppressed people, slavery, then Jim Crow, now mass incarceration, and you're surprised? Like the former dean of my law school, Matt Spitzer, who was sitting down at lunch with me some years back and said, if I inwardly remained exactly who I am, same level of intelligence and native, drive and ambition, but I was stuck in these neighborhoods around us, and he was pointed to South Central, which was around USC. He said, I know what I'd have to do. I'd be selling drugs because I would be so ambitious. I'd want a piece of the American dream, but the legitimate means to that end would be, first, I wouldn't have access to, so I would go with what I had access to. In this situation, because what you had was both a president and an attorney general who went into office with what I'm going to call a kind of privileged mentality, a mentality that focused on the interest of privileged blacks at the expense of underprivileged blacks. The underprivileged black, when you're talking about neighborhoods like Watts, South Central, Jungle near me, where 90% of the young black males at some point are going to wind up in jail on probation or on parole, at some point in life. 90%, then Mr. President, Mr. Attorney General, your hair is on fire. Do something about it. Instead of dealing with their hair being on fire, Holder has actually, for 4 years, aggravated the problem by fighting decriminalization efforts and by encouraging more enforcement of these draconian laws that now he calls draconian, but he was enforcing them for all those years. And the president himself, whenever he talks to Morehouse or anybody else, even today, he wags his finger self-righteously at a lot of lower-class blacks and says, fathers need to be in the home. Well, he didn't have a father in the home, and it didn't hurt him. He's the president of the United States. What has to be in the home is some economic support, like he was getting from his grandparents, going to the best school in Honolulu, and then to Columbia, and then to Harvard. Then you don't have to necessarily have a father in the home. You just have to have the support. And so but he makes the noises that the far right wants to hear. I used to think he was just throwing a sop to the Fox crew, but I think he actually believes it. I think he's one of those good Negroes versus the bad Negroes. Black people, I love black people, but I hate niggas. And, he sees himself as one of the good black people and is falling into that mentality. So what it is it's about class as much as it is about race. It is when you don't have people who have Obama's opportunities, who went to the best private high school in Honolulu, but instead they went to a crumbling high school called Crenshaw, and they don't have any options, then those people are going to turn to some way of eking out respect, self-respect, not just a living, but since you've defined respect in this culture as having some kind of material well-being, well, they have to get some material well-being too. Not just a minimum wage is going to provide that kind of respect that your culture has defined as the minimum. So it really is going to take that kind of gestalt shift, a refocus on the interest of the least among us, which the black middle class has not done. We've looked at, my biggest concern when I went through A Better Chance was that people would use the example of Jody Armour as proof that the status quo works, that there's racially equal. I could easily, black middle class can easily start saying, don't confuse them with me. The only way that the black middle class avoids completely separating itself from the black underclass is profiling, is that they get profiled, they get mistaken for criminals, for black criminals. And they hate that. Ellis Coles wrote a book, Rage of a Privileged Class, about all these middle-class blacks who were enraged that they were continuing to be profiled after they'd accomplished all these professional things, had all these accolades. I'm going to tell you something pretty radical, Jane. I've written against the black tax, I call it, profiling a lot for years. There's a silver lining in the black tax, in racial profiling. As long as they don't look good, you don't look good, middle-class blacks. Until you do something about the statistics, you're going to continue to get profiled. Until you lift them out of poverty, you're going to continue to get mistaken for them. So there's a tide that binds you. You should look at the black tax as a tide that binds your fate to theirs and keeps you from just floating off by yourself into your, into your fancy estates.